was fun.
So you're obviously a super successful guy. So what did your parents do to really inspire you to become successful? What did they do to inspire you to end up the way you are today?
Well, well, first of all, being a parent myself, it's an interesting question about how much as parents we can actually do to shape our children. But I do think there are some things that we can do to kind of lead them in the right direction. And one of the things that I think, at least for me, that worked is that my parents had very high expectations for me. They always, had or expected me to do well, gave me a lot of rope to experiment, and sort of, I think, had a lot of faith in sort of my abilities, and that made me believe more in myself. The other thing really is that my father is just an exceptional person, and he was a great role model for me. And I think, as a boy, having a dad that is a great role model is I think, very important. And it also for a girl, but I think especially for a young boy to have a father as a role model. He's just one of these people who is, really good at what he does. He was a surgeon, but he also was a really good dad. And throughout my life, even though he worked a lot, I always felt like at those key moments, he was there. Whether it was, we played a lot of tennis, he was there watching us. We played baseball, he was always there. If I needed help, he was especially good at math. And if I needed help with a problem, he was there, even though he worked a tremendous amount. So I think he did a good job of prioritizing certainly work and doing well there, but also being a dad. And I think that made a huge difference. And hopefully it's something that I try to do too as a father.
So you mentioned expectations, setting high expectations, which you said is important. So can you think of any specific expectations, like maybe with grades or your social life or sports performance? Do you have anything specific that you can remember that really triggered you or that set you going?
Well, for me, I think, my parents always expected us to do very well in school. And they never paid us for getting good grades, or they never, if we got good grades, we never went out for ice cream or anything like that. It was just an expectation set from very early on that at our house, school was very important. And they expected, because I had the capability to do well, they expected me to do well and to want that for myself. I don't remember, and I don't know if this was my parents or if this was more internally motivated, but I wasn't doing well, I think, from a school standpoint because I wasn't doing it for my parents. They instilled in me that I should want to do that for myself, and I think that's really an important distinction. Again, it's hard because I'm not sure that I do that well as a parent myself. But one of the things that I heard my kids say to me now is, hey, I'm going to try to do well because I know that's what you want for me. And I want, what I always say back to them is, I want you to want this for yourself. And I think that's an important distinction to make, that, again, you have to somehow instill in your children, which I think my parents did a good job, that this is not, we're telling you something that we expect, but you should expect it of yourself. And I think that's a hard thing to do. And I think a lot of it depends on sort of how you're wired. But definitely my parents were good at doing that. The other thing I would say is that, and I work really hard on this as a parent, is that my parents, I think, did a good job of instilling the importance of family. So I have two brothers, and one of the things I think they did an extraordinary job of was, there were time for friends, but there was also special time that we just spent as a unit. And I'm still very close with my two brothers. I never felt jealousy toward them. I was always excited for their accomplishments. They made us go to watch, when we were young, our brothers compete in sporting events. They made us go, if anyone were to sort of do something well, we would all go and attend and cheer for them. And I think that was really important. even from a very early age, to instill that idea that you support your brothers, in my case. And I try to do that a lot with my kids, which is, there's just the one, I'm pretty lenient on a lot of things, but one thing that I'm not lenient about as a parent is not being supportive of your brother and sister. And I have two boys and a girl, and I'm just like, that's something that is right line rule. Like we're a family, and you support your brother and sister in everything that they do.
Awesome.
And I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah. How old are your kids exactly again? Did we go over that?
Yeah, I have one's turning 13 today. My son Zach is 13 today, and
Happy birthday.
yeah, happy birthday, Zach, if you're watching. And then I have a 10-year-old girl and a 9-year-old boy.
Okay, cool.
I'll ask one of these.
All righty.
Got plenty of them. How about, do you have a favorite story about your parents?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I know that my father used to do is he would put a lock on the TV. I don't even know.
Like a padlock?
No, he had this. He's pretty technical, so he somehow, these are these really old TVs, so he somehow, took off the box and created this, jerry-rigged this system where where he could turn on and off the TV that we had. And what I always remember about that is my brothers and I would go looking for that darn lock, because he, for some reason, wouldn't bring it into work. Occasionally we would find it, and then if we found it for a couple weeks, we could watch more TV than they could find. But one of the things that my parents, I think, did well too is to prioritize things. And so they put limits on television watching, but not too strict a limits. So the TV was unlocked during the weekends, but during the week they would typically lock that television. And my brothers and I would look for that key. And I mean, one of the exciting things was actually when we found it, we wouldn't say anything, and then we could watch certain shows. But that's something I think, again, that I think he did a good job, and my mom as well, sort of setting limits on television. The other thing I think, the other story I would say is that, and again, I just admire them so much, my mom especially, and my father, but like certain things that we were good at, like my youngest brother Tim, I don't know if you guys knew Tim growing up, but he was one of the best tennis players in the United States. He was ranked in the top 5 at one point in the United States. But they, for things that we were exceptional at, they would go out of their way to prioritize that for us. So they would travel around with all of us to play tennis tournaments all over the Pacific Northwest. We would go on these weekends and stay in these, fly-by-night hotels or motels, I should say, which was great memories as a kid. But now looking back, I'm thinking to myself, wow, I can't believe my parents, now that I've done it a couple times at various I went to a chess tournament once, and I'm like, my goodness, how do they stand it? But they would just, most weekends, we were off, especially when we were in the heart of it playing these tennis tournaments, they were off, and they were very committed to having us sort of be successful at that. And again, I think it showed that they were committed to our success, which is nice growing up. Again, I think it can go overboard too, but in that case, I think for my brothers and I, that made a big difference.
Cool. So was there ever a period where you were like a problem child for your parents, where you were talking back or just kind of off the rails at all? If there was anything like that, how did they handle it?
Well, I don't think I certainly wasn't perfect as a child. As the oldest, I don't know, there's all these birth order studies that people do, but as the oldest, I probably was a little bit less problematic than my two brothers in terms of some of those problem areas, only because maybe I felt like, as the oldest, I did feel some kind of responsibility. I mean, I definitely wasn't perfect, and I had, I gave my parents a lot of problems. I mean, there were certain times where I might want to take the car out during rainstorms and other things because I had things I wanted to do, and I remember getting in some real arguments with my mom about that. But I was pretty good overall, and I left most of the really fun stuff to my brothers. They would tell me, and that's another important thing. This is more of a tip to brothers and sisters: is if your brother or sister tells you something in confidence, you should try as best you can to keep that in confidence if you want to be told other things in the future. But we had our own, they would sometimes come to me as the oldest brother, and yeah, they had more fun during high school than I did, I think. Yeah.
Very good. Is there anything that your parents did in their teaching style with you that you are now doing with your children?
Oh, I think there's no question. I think we model ourselves after our parents very much, and one of the things that I try to do is be supportive of, especially things that we are prioritizing in our house, like homework and other things, and you want, it's hard because I don't know if I do this perfectly well, but there's a fine line between letting the kids do things for themselves and learn for themselves, and helping them to sort of see what they can achieve, by steering them in the right direction. My parents were really good at that. Like, for example, my mom would always proofread my English papers, and I think that's really important. And I consider myself and as you know, I've written some books and consider myself a good writer, and I think a lot of that is due to my grandmother and my mom, who edited my papers all through high school, and and then you can pick and choose as you get older what edits that you like or you don't like, but that's the way you learn. It's not like you aren't born a great writer or a great communicator or a great mathematician. It's something that you learn, and it's not just at school that you learn. So I think a lot of parents, I think, are sort of would sort of say, hey, let's let the school do all that work. But when my kids let me, which isn't all the time, frankly, because I can be overbearing and have high expectations, but I do, if they'll let me, like to try to help them. I'm more math. My wife is more on the English stuff, but like to help them with their homework, and again, try to be that extra sort of teacher. My parents did an excellent job of that. My father more math, and my mom more on my English stuff.
So you talked about your mom would help you with the writing assignments, you go through and edit them. What did that process look like? Was she, sitting there with the paper that you just wrote and going through it sentence by sentence? Was it like a really kind of a hand-holding thing like that, so that it was really specific, or was it more, did it look different than that? How did it look?
Well, I would always do a first draft, and then she would sit down. She wouldn't, again, I think this is important. I don't do this perfectly with my kids, but she really required that I sit down next to her. If she was gonna put in this time, she wanted me to sit there with her, and she would read it, and she would suggest changes or things, and she you want it to be in the child's voice, and she was pretty good about not being overbearing on that, but she might suggest hey, this doesn't make sense to me, or what are you trying to say here, or here's a misspelling. This was back in the days where a lot of this was handwritten too, or early days of computer. We didn't have spell checkers as much. Yeah, so she would sit down and look at those things, and I think it honestly, it's like much more even than school. I credit sort of my writing a lot to my mother and then my grandmother, who was a great writer, and the time that they spent going over. Because again, once something goes in for school, it comes back, and a teacher. I'm a professor now of entrepreneurship at the University of Washington Business School, and I know because I correct a lot of these business plans, other things. I mean, teachers, you're looking at a lot of different papers, especially if you're a teacher in a high school or elementary school or middle school. You don't have time to sort of go in depth on all these sorts of things. I just think there's only so much you can learn from that. But if you have a parent who's willing to sit down with you, not at every single thing that you do, but if you've got a book report or something, and they sit down and say, hey, have you thought of this? This doesn't make sense. You might need to reword. I think that can make a big difference.
Awesome. Yeah, I think, for a lot of the parents out there, they're going to be seeing this. They want their kids to do well at school, to get straight A's, for example. You know, and I think some people might have the attitude that, like you said, let the school take care of it, or they need to figure this out on their own. But you're saying that your mom, and this in turn led you to be a great writer. You're editor of the high school newspaper staff, so early on you were a great writer. Then
Right.
you've got 3 books that you published.
Yeah.
But your mom went through, it sounds like kind of sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, and really mentored you.
No question. And it wasn't going to come. There's no teacher that would ever do that.
Right.
No teacher has the time to do
So
that.
that was critical that she was right there with you.
It was critical.
Yeah.
And again, I think there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. I don't know, you know, I am such a perfectionist when it comes to writing. I don't know if that was driven by my parents. I'm actually in some ways not as good of a, for my young kids as an editor as my wife is, who's a little more loose in terms of she'll, you know, because I look at every sentence and I'm thinking like, hey, this is grammatically incorrect. Or
Okay.
that's probably going overboard. So I think you've got to sort of have that fine line between allowing your kid the ability to do some things and to learn how to do it themselves, because ultimately that's what matters. They're going to go to college, and then you can't. Once I went to college, I was on my own.
Right.
But yeah, having that person for those key assignments sort of sit down with you and talk with you about your writing, I think again makes all the difference. And I think it's something that it's still a lot of schools and kids sort of don't do as well as write well. And I see that even in the business world, where I'll get these emails, and I'm sure you guys see this too, and you're just shocked at how few people communicate really well through writing.
So I'm getting the sense from the way you're describing this, like kind of like using writing as like a representative of your parents' overall parenting style, that maybe you would describe it as close but not overbearing.
I think it was close, not overbearing, and also I was very motivated to want to do well for myself. So one of the things that I will say is that I think initially my mom would come and say, do you want me to edit this? But as I got older, I really wanted her to, I would do a paper and say, hey, will you look at this? Can we look at this together? Or go to my grandmother, hey, can we look at this together? Or go then, as I got into college, go to a friend and say, hey, can you read this? I mean, I actually, I was an editor of the, as you said, of the high school paper. I was editor of one of the editors of the Stanford Daily, a sports editor early on, and that was really important to me. You know, I love to have my stuff edited. I love to hear what other people had to say. So, anyway, it was something that they really instilled in me.
That's a good point too. But so that going through that process with your mom so many times, it made you open to feedback, which probably, I'm guessing here, correct me if I'm wrong, fed your success as you went through life.
No question. Yeah.
Cool. You brought up going off to Stanford, and you know, I went to the Air Force Academy. When I got there, I realized, holy cow, there's all these things that, you know, that my parents did well, and then some things that, you know, I felt like I should have known. So going off to Stanford, was there any like epiphanies you had, or any realizations like, wow, my parents did that really, really well. They super prepared me for that, and maybe some areas where you could have been better prepared?
Well, one of the things that I did note at Stanford, even though we all went to a public school, which was a great public school, but when I went to Stanford, always felt, I think they made me believe in myself and that I could do really well in any environment. And I think even at Stanford or later on at Harvard Law School or Harvard Business School, I think I always felt like, you know, even though I might not have been the smartest person in the room, that I could do extremely well. And I think that was something that my parents really instilled in me. That was the thing that more than anything they gave me was confidence.
Cool.
About last question, well, maybe it's the last question. How did your parents influence your success?
Well, again, we talked about it a little bit, but I think more than anything, they built, and I'm trying to do this as a parent myself, is they built a sense of confidence that that by when I left home, when I went off to college, that you know I you know could, if I put my mind to it, I could really achieve something. And they were really great parents at instilling that in all three of us. I think that and I think that's so important in being successful. is just believing in yourself, and believing that you can solve a problem, believing that you, when presented with a difficult situation, that you can overcome. And I think one of the things that my parents did is they gave me a belief that I could do it, and I also knew that if I failed, that their love was unconditional,
Mm-hmm.
that they would be there for me if something really were ever to happen. And I think that's another thing that I think good parents. It's interesting. I told my son this. I don't know if I do. We all try hard as parents, and we make mistakes. And my son the other day was telling me about. We were talking about his grades, and I had a discussion with him, and I didn't feel it went perfectly. And I went back to him as he was lying in bed. I said, Zach, I said, no matter what you do, the reason why I'm pushing you hard is because I think that you have the ability to do well. I said, but even if you don't do well, I'll still love you the same amount.
Yeah,
You'll always have me, whether you get A's or B's or F's, I will love you the exact same amount. But I think you have the ability to do well, and I'd like to see you, for yourself. I'd like to see you, have that success. And I don't know if it's sunk in, but it was important for me to go back and say that, because I always felt that from my parents. Yes, it was very important to them that I do well, and they had that expectation. But I knew that even if I didn't, or if I were to fail at something, they would still be there for me.
So overall,
it wasn't conditional.
Right. How would you define success as a parent?
Yeah.
You could take 30 seconds and talk about, at the end of the day, how would you feel, what tells you that you're successful as a parent?
Well, first of all, I think it's impossible to bat 1,000 as a parent, and I think, what you try to do is hopefully bat better than 500, get it right most of the time, because it's really hard, and especially when you have multiple kids that have such different strengths, such incredibly different personalities, different tolerances for how hard you can push them, different interests and passions. And so, I don't think there's sort of a one-size-fits-all for being a successful parent. But if I was going to say there's, the one thing I think that you can do is, well, let me say that the two things. One is, again, we talked about this, is try to give your kids, confidence that they, and a belief that they can sort of do great things if they put their mind to it. And that's hard depending on the child. My youngest has that naturally, and so for him it's a little bit easier. But I think for a lot of kids, that's something that as a parent you can instill more.
Absolutely.
And then second is, I think, somehow making them know that your love for them is unconditional, that you want them, to follow down a certain path, but like everyone, mistakes are going to be made, and you're going to be there for them. I think if you can have those two things, I think that's key. Can I say one other thing? I think a key to being a good parent is prioritization.
Mm-hmm. So what are your priorities?
Yeah.
If you had to stack them up.
One of the things that my wife tells me often is like, well, I'm very busy, as are you guys, doing this and everything you do. But like a lot of people, I have a very busy, I work a lot, too much maybe, but that's important to me, so I prioritize my work. And then I prioritize my family. And those are the two priorities I have, work and family. And what that means is certain things have to fall off, because you cannot do everything. You can't prioritize sports then. You can't prioritize friends then. And so one of the things that I don't do as much of that I'd like to do is I don't go out to beers with friends, or go out and play a whole bunch of, I don't have a regular sports schedule. And that's just the reality of prioritizing. I'm going to spend a lot of time doing work stuff, and I'm going to be spending a lot of time being a dad. And everything else is a distant second. And again, that's not to say that things like friends and other sort of passions and interests might not be important. They are important, but they're not as important as those two things. And I think to be a great parent, you have to be a great parent, or be the best one that you could be, you have to prioritize and make hard choices.
Right, and you mentioned
about where to spend your time.
In another interview that you spend about 70 to 80 hours a week working here at Madrona.
Yeah, at least, yeah.
And so that, I imagine, doesn't leave a whole lot of time to spend with your kids during the day or on the weekend. So,
but I think the issue is that then, if you're going to spend 70 plus hours a week at work, then you can't have a lot of other things other than family as your priority. But if you then say that my second and equally important or more important priority is family, then there's enough time. But if you've got other things in addition to that, it makes it very difficult.
Right. And so we'll talk about quality of time versus quantity of time. You know what I mean? With your kids. How do you?
I think that's very hard. Because you're also tired.
Right.
And not just quality of time. When you have multiple kids, I think it's easy then to want to spend all of your time with all three of my kids in my case, versus some individual time, which I think as being a good parent too is also being willing to spend individual time with your children. I know I've done this father-daughter group with my daughter. My daughter and I have less interest than the two boys and I have. Just naturally, I love sports, they love sports, we have something natural to talk about. We go throw the ball around. My daughter's less interested in that, so I have to actually then specifically focus on some individual time with her, doing things that she likes, and prioritize that. And as best I can, also have individual time for the two boys, in addition to time that we all spend together. And that's really, really hard, but again, it's about putting it on your schedule and marking it down and prioritizing it. And again, I don't do a perfect job of that, but I do think to myself, if there's something that my kids are doing, I put it on my schedule, and it would take something extremely important to knock that off. So if I've got a father-daughter event with my daughter, that is a priority for me. If I've got a basketball game for my son, then that is a priority for me. I've tried to coach the two boys in at least, over the course of years in sports that they like, and then that becomes a priority, trying to go to those games and just being there for them. And then prioritizing that, and not letting other things, as best as I can, interfere with that.
One of the questions I want to make sure to ask you, and I think a lot of parents with teenagers are going to be interested in, growing up, I remember you had a girlfriend in high school. I don't remember what her name was, but how did your parents handle dating? That kind of a teenage social life.
Yeah. My parents were very good about dating, and they didn't intrude too much. I think it's sort of that fine line. My wife has I think in some ways is going to be a better parent, especially when it comes to my daughter and dating, than I will be. But I think you have to, I think if you are, my sense is that, again, I credit, my wife is, and I'm not just saying this, she is a better parent than I am because she's a better listener. And I think one of the key things around girls, especially during these teenage years, around girlfriends or boyfriends, is just listening to what they say instead of giving advice. Asking them questions. They have a lot of questions, and again, my wife is a better listener than I am. She's more empathetic, and she's better at sort of not just inserting her own opinions into everything. And I think, so I'm glad that she's around. I think also one of the things I would say about being a good parent is hopefully if you have a partner in crime, and understanding what it is that you do well as a parent and what it is that maybe in my case that my wife does well, and she really, on a lot of the emotional and other kinds of important areas like that, she really takes the ball, and she's better at that than me. And actually, I fully recognize that she's better at that at me, as do the kids, which is why they talk to her. she is a wonderful parent, and one of the things that we try to do is always try to be on the same page. As we're not always on the same page, but we try to be on the same page and talk about, if we do have a difference, which one of the nice things that I'm lucky to have is that we usually are on the same page about almost everything having to do with with child raising. But when we're not, we talk about it, and then she usually is right. So that's important, especially if you're raising kids, in a house where you have two parents. Making sure that you have that sort of that single focus. Again, kids are incredibly good at dividing and conquering.
Yeah.
And even frankly, if you're divorced, and I see this because I have family members who have gone through this. Having that unified front on issues, I just think is so critical, because again, especially as kids get older, they're pretty wise and pretty good at sort of, and I think that isn't good for the kids. And again, these are on the important issues. We could tell specific stories, but on the important issues like, bedtime, how much do you time spending playing video games, girlfriend, boyfriend issues, those things. You need to be consistent across both parents on those issues.
Did your parents have any kind of a policy like you're not dating until you're 17?
They didn't have any kind of policy like that.
And then you don't have any.
But I know that they were both very consistent on sort of what was sort of appropriate and what was not. They were pretty. They put a lot of trust in us until we didn't earn it. So I was pretty good, but sometimes my brother. Again, if you sort of, they would trust us until we basically, and they were pretty savvy, until we sort of proved them wrong, at which point then the hammer would come down. I think I would take a similar case, which is I want to be very trusting, and then hopefully, be very specific in what we expect, and then when those expectations aren't met, then there has to be a consequence.
Very cool.
I think that's it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, guys.
Good seeing
Thank
you
you, Greg.
guys.
Appreciate
Well,
it.
I mean, the other thing I would say too is that I certainly, and I know you guys don't think you, which is great that you're doing this. I don't have all the answers, so I'm looking forward to hearing what other folks have to say. But one of the things that is clear about being a parent is I think it's really important to realize that you're going to make mistakes, and then to also, if you have a spouse, one of the things my wife is very good at is if she thinks I have done something that she doesn't agree with regard to parenting, she will, she'll tell me, hopefully in a nice way. And I don't tell her as much because she makes less mistakes than I do, but I think that's really nice to have, and to have a kind of relationship as parents where like what I'll tell her is, hey, if I'm doing something that you don't think is right, then tell me. And she's told me several times, like, for example, I can be very critical of and it's just a natural thing. I'm in my job. My whole job is about criticizing business plans, trying to make these startups successful. It's very hard, and so I'm naturally, going to be critical about certain things, and that doesn't work as well with young children. And I realize that, and so if I'm sort of overbearing or critical, sometimes my wife will say, hey, you could have said that differently, or that wasn't the best way to sort of approach that. And I'll say the same thing to her occasionally, and I think that's very helpful. And there are a lot of times where I'll think and say, because again, getting better is important as a parent, as a person. So.
One last question I just wanted to ask real quick. Did you guys eat dinner together as a family? Was that a regular thing that you guys all did?
We try to do that as much. We don't do as good a job that in my house now. We do it. I try to do it. But again, my job tends to be more something where I work a little bit later, and so I'm going to have to find other times where I have that family time together. Again, I prioritize family. But a lot of people say it's that dinner is like the critical thing, and doing that, and I totally think that for certain families that works. For my family, that it's just not possible.
Right.
And so then it's required then that I, am there on certain weekends, or that when we have sporting events we all go to that, or that when we, again, we've got to spend on a regular basis family time together, and if you can't make certain things like dinner work, then again, try to make morning time work. Try to do other things, and I try to do. I'm not perfect at that, but I do think having that that time is important. And again, putting things like important types of family things on your schedule, and basically, you know, letting everyone know that doesn't get changed.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you
thanks,
very
really
much, Greg.
appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. I think it's good. I mean, I think what you're trying to accomplish here is important.
Yeah, yeah.